Steve mustered out of the Navy in 1985 with everything in 3 shoe boxes, so the railroad had expanded. Then he went to work as a contractor, working at the Navy's transmitter site on Guam and building new radar sites in Iceland and Greenland. He finally returned to the States in 1989 and joined the Mud Hens. And apart from going back to school for 5 years, he's been active in the club's activities, that's the Mud Hens, and is a past president. He's also been a member of the MNRA for 7 years and is currently working toward his MMR. Steve enjoys building, and what is his favorite media, hence tonight's presentation on water tanks. Yeah, Steve, it's all yours.
Okay, tonight I wanted to, well, what I wanted to do originally, Dave was asking for photos to be sent in, so I sent photos of from a Mud Hens article I wrote for my club for when I built water tanks, and you're looking at 4 of them right here. I've actually built about 9 so far, some of them for some of the other Mud Hens members. Anyway, why 4 in a row? Okay, I decided a while ago, and this happened when I was building some rail line kits. It's easier to build kits en masse. In other words, if you're going to build more than 1 water tank, why not build them all at the same time? Do it factory style. And when you do that, you've got the same materials on hand. You got the same tools out that you're going to need, same paints, same weathering, and you still got the ideas fresh in your head from the one you just worked on 5 minutes ago. So these are all pretty much what you're looking at are kit built. I've only built 1 scratch built one, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes.
Hemp's gonna win, they think.
Primarily Lake County.
Now,
Yeah.
somebody is on. Anyway, I work in HOn3. So what you're going to be looking at are all HOn3 kits. And if you excuse the busy background, that's pretty much what the shop looks like when I'm building stuff. The one in the foreground with the bare wood on it, that turned into the Telluride tank. The next one is the Ames tank, also on the RGS. The next one is the Ridgeway tank without the roof. I just liked it that way. And the big yellow one on the end is for Durango. And as we go through here, I'll describe a few of these other tanks here. One of the things I'll mention about the kits, in HOn3, there's a whole bunch of different kits available. A lot of them, in fact, most of them are out of print. Just to throw a few names out there, Builders in Scale, they had one for the CNS. Durango Press, that's what these are for the most part. There are some Alexander parts in there. And Banta, just a few years ago, came out with a really good model of the Ridgeway tank. I have not built it. Most of the ones I've built are Campbell or Durango Press. And you get quite a bit of bang for your buck, and there's some flexibility in it. Campbell I mentioned, Alexander Scale I mentioned, Timberline made some tanks along with Simpson. In S scale, I don't model S scale, but from what I've heard, the list is more limited. You've got Banta and Crystal River. I don't know if Crystal River is still producing that tank kit. I know they made a really good one in O scale. Banta, Crystal River, Suncoast, and Scale Modelers all built O scale. And Simpson, a while back, built one in N scale. They provided a kit. For parts, you might hear me mention some of the parts that go into these things. Grant Line, Weissman. From what I understand, Durango Press also sells it. They were changed their name, bought out, I guess, by JL Innovative Design, if you're looking for it. And most of what you see here is available on eBay or your favorite shop. As far as materials that I put into this, the paint, I just use cheap water-based paint from Walmart. There's really not much to it. You got to mix it up and take your best guess as to what the color is going to be, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. The chalks I use for weathering are from AIM products, AIM products. I use some nylon filament from Clover House. It's 18 thousandths. That's for some of the banding. A lot of the banding that you see, the wider stripes, that's just automotive pinstriping off a roll. And it's a peel and stick Anyway, let's see what we got here. You got to do some research. So I used photos in books, magazines. I've mentioned beware of color shift. If you look at the photo on the left, it's pretty badly color shifted and everything looks kind of blue. You don't see a whole lot of reds in that picture. You see the greens and the blues. The whites and the darks, you still get the contrast, but in some of the old photos, and this is out of a book, you just don't get the color saturation doesn't last in the film or something. I don't know if it had to do with Kodachrome or not. That's a whole other clinic. But the photo on the right, as far as know your era, that is the Durango tank. And sometime in the late 50s, early 60s, Hollywood came to town and they built a spout on the left side of that photo so that they could photograph a locomotive in front of the spout during the sunset. Maybe they didn't do their homework, but they could have gone to Chama and done the exact same thing. But so I do quite a bit of homework on working on these tanks. An example there, just to give credit where credit is due, the photograph you see on the left, a black and white photo, was taken in Durango. And that's in a book called The RGS Story. If anybody models the RGS, it's a really good, it's like Encyclopedia RGS. If you model the Rio Grande, it's still a valuable book. They cover Durango pretty much in very good detail. But what I was looking for in that photo was a couple of things. One, there's this vertical stripe that's kind of light colored in the black and white photo going up the edge of the tank. That's that gap between the boards that you see. And the other one is more important, is the spacing of the turnbuckles. So as they go up and around the tank, there's 3 rows of them, if you will, and are vertical columns of these turnbuckles, and they're spaced going around the tank in a spiral pattern. So the steel rods that went between these are pretty much a long piece of all thread, and it goes into the turnbuckle with a threaded end, and then a third of the way around the tank it hits another turnbuckle, another third of the way around the tank hits another turnbuckle. So this is one of the earlier pieces that I put on a model, and I marked it very carefully as a guide to figure out how many there would be, how their spacing would be. You can cheat on these a little bit. One of the things that's hard to scale down, at least in HO scale, in O scale, you'd probably have a better time of it. But in HOn3, the grain of wood does not scale up or scale down very easily, because in HO scale, with 3.5 millimeters to the foot, if you've got wood grain that's 1/16 of an inch wide, it's just not going to show. So I use very fine sandpaper, and you'll see the results in a few minutes. If you look on the photo on the right, still doing homework, is a photo I took in Chama, and they had not just turnbuckles for rods, but they had hoops. It looks like, to me, like the bands were on first and the rods came second. Hard to tell, but the reason they have these at much tighter intervals at the bottom of the tank is because of water pressure. When you have a water column 16 feet high, it wants to leak out between all the boards. So you got to hold all those staves tightly packed together. That's what the banding is for. Some more photos. We use our own photos that we've taken when we go on expeditions to the Promised Land up in Colorado. So the one on the far left is one I took of the Trout Lake tank. And you can pretty much tell what era it is. This photo was not taken in 1952 because of the little trash skip out in front. But we can't go back to 1952. So a lot of times we've got to use other people's photos. And we find those mostly in books, but you can find them on the internet, and there's a lot of resources. One of the key resources that I found, especially for water tanks, was the Colorado Rail Annual number 31, and its title is Colorado Water Tanks. And it just drills down to the detail. How many inches long was this? Technical drawings of things. Really, really good resource. How the plug valves work. And in addition to the book itself, there's a CD in the back of it. And the CD-ROM has all kinds of water tank details on it. including photos of just about every tank anybody took a photo of. So for their photos, ones out of books or online, I got this one off the internet. That's a photo of the Hermosa tank on the Durango and Silverton, on the Silverton line. And then when I say compare photos, you'll see kind of an in-progress photo of my Ridgeway tank compared to an actual photo in a book of Ridgeway. That tank, if you notice, has white stains from calcium seeping through the wood. And I kind of had to get all the shadows right and all of the white stains right. And I mostly used chalk for that. Here's Cresco tank. This photo was taken by Chuck Proudfoot. And he and Scott also showed me the way that you hike down to the tank from up on the road just above. It's a very short hike and very worthwhile. Interesting on this tank, and I think on a few others along the line, there's rumors and there's facts. Rumor is, oh, well, the RGS had all round roofs on their tanks, and the DNRGW had all octagon roofs on their tanks, and that's just not true. This and the Los Pinos tank, and you saw the Hermosa tank, several of them still have round roofs. I believe this is from an earlier era. Another little thing about this tank, if you look at the bands and the straps, it's got both. The ladder you see has been reinforced over the years. It's much thicker than the little flimsy ladders we get with our models. Cresco tank has another interesting feature. It has extra rows of legs. So when modeling the details, you got to, if let's say you had a Durango press kit or a Banta kit, you're going to want to get out your stock lumber, scale lumber, and get some 12 by 12s and start cutting them to shape and fit in a few extra legs on this one. So every tank has its own personality. Every tank, not all of them have the ladder directly 90 degrees from the spout on the left side. Some of them are offset. Some of them come from the uphill side. The one on the Ames tank, I found out the ladder was shorter because it was uphill from the tank. It's also kind of a flimsy ladder, and you got to be careful if you're playing around some of these antique water tanks out that really exist in Colorado. Do watch your step, because first, it's a confined space. You get up in there and you fall in, you might not get back out. Second, I wouldn't trust myself to climb in a 30-foot ladder that's made out of wood that's 100 years old or however old it may be. So tread lightly, take photos, carry home memories. Anyway, here we go with scratch built. I was lucky enough that Lori Flom, one of our members, president of the Mud Hens currently, she has been modeling the Silverton Northern, and the tank at Eureka still exists. It's actually that little building on the far left, and it says Eureka on it, so you can't miss. And it's board and batten with a pyramid roof on it. And I scratch built that one. You'll see the model in just a few minutes. But in some cases, you have to extrapolate. You don't know the facts of what was there. I only found 2 photos of it that had a spout. In both photos, the spout was just like a pixel. And you couldn't tell the shape of it. There was something vertical and there was something silver hanging off the end of it. That's about all you could tell from the photos. And so I had to fill in some of the gaps. Another thing, up on the roof, there was a bell. Apparently that was the town bell. And I had a leftover little brass bell. I think it was precision scale bell off a locomotive, and I just stuck it up there and it seemed to look right. So, hey, don't argue with it unless you got a photo you can show me that says otherwise. So kind of the rule of my railroad, I'll do it my way, applies when you're extrapolating and trying to get the facts right. And on the far right, Lori wanted a tank that used to exist at the south end of Silverton. That shows up as about 6 pixels in an online photo. So what I did was I basically copied the Hermosa tanks. It was an early era. It had bands on it. And one of the things I noticed from the 6 pixels, it looked a lot like the frost box was placed toward the front of the tank on that one. So I went ahead and placed the frost box toward the front of the tank. Other than that, that's a Hermosa tank with Durango pressed plastic roof. Okay, so building on an assembly line, I'm kind of backtracking here, but what I do, I build all the tank barrels all together, get them knocked out, and that way I'm using all the same techniques. And I build all the lower halves. They all go together pretty easily. And if you look on the far right, hanging off the edge of the layout there, I'm using my own layout as a workbench mostly. You'll see the Durango press instructions, and that's just to get all the planking right and all that stuff. The legs I found, looking at the center photo, it looks like the legs aren't plumb. Well, they weren't. Some of them were canted in slightly, just a few degrees. So that's another little detail I tried to get in there. Going back to the far left on the tank barrels, that's the tank for Durango. And I started out, as you saw in the previous photo with bare wood, I sanded it all first before I put anything on it. And you get down to pretty fine grit sandpaper. Ended up using 300 grit at one point. All the turnbuckles went on, and then I got out a little micro drill, and I drilled a bunch of 20 thousandths holes in it. And then I used basically fishing line. Technically, it's not fishing line, it's nylon filament from a clover house. And it's 18 thousandths, and it passes through that 20 thousandths hole, like threading a needle. And I literally sewed the rods around, pulling them tight. That was one way I could get it tight and only have to tie 2 knots in it towards the beginning and the end. Made it way easy to clamp. After that was all in, I painted it yellow. Mixed the yellow with a little wash of white and thinned it down with some water. And that's got about 5 layers of yellow on it. I put the decal on after the first layer of yellow that was undiluted. Once the decal was set in with some Salvacet, and I used an X-Acto to get it to fit around the banding and everything, wanted to make it look faded in with the weather. So use the exact same color as the paint on the prototype that would be under it, the yellow, but thin it out a little bit and fade it down a little bit. Once I did that, I used a little bit of AIM Products chalk, and don't use much, and don't use a good paintbrush to put the chalk on. The chalk will stick to the paintbrush, and you'll never get it out of there and clean it up enough to paint with a paintbrush again. So use a cheap Tester's paintbrush, streak it on there from the metal turnbuckle downwards, and then get a Q-tip and wipe most of it off. And I think you get a really nice weathered effect. These tanks are out in the weather 24/7 up in the mountains with the sun beating on them, the water freezing to them. They get beat up. So I wanted it to look beat up but maintained. So that's kind of the reason for the Durango tank. And the pinkish color you see on the inside is just a sealer. Getting back to the center photo, painted it grimy black. Just all the ones I saw seemed to be black or dark brown, so that's what they get. And then, of course, select a safe place up and away from the dog, the cat, whatever you may have at home, children's hands, to let everything dry. One of the things I found when you do things assembly line style and you've got to let some paint dry or some glue dry, it's fine. You've already moved on to the second one. And if you're doing 4 of them, it works out well. You can get back to that first one and the glue is already tacked up. So you can keep moving right along. It only took me a couple of weeks to do 6 water tanks. 4 of them are kind of the second ones of the batch. Okay, on the left, that's the way the Eureka tank turned out. I darkened it up a little bit, used from Reg's Riches, they sold sheets of shingles. I just basically used their peel and stick shingles on it. The spout is nothing fancy. It's a standpipe spout from Tichy Train Group. And I just kind of made it work. And I had to drill holes through it. And the vertical column under the pipe, or the spout that you see, is attached to radio control airplane bell crank. And the floor is like a pallet. It's got 2 layers. And you can attach a switch machine to that. But I've tried to make all the spouts on all these tanks actually function. Thanks to a Gazette article years ago, I thought, well, how come mine don't work? I want them to work. So I worked on it. Anyway, that one rotates into position. The Ridgeway tank in the center, that's pretty much finished product on the Ridgeway tank. It lost the roof in a fire in 1946, from what I understand. So I tried to get the edges of the interior to look like they were scorched and put some dirty water in there. That's just epoxy resin over a flat piece of black paper. And on the outside of it, there's a lot of water staining from seepage. There's that flimsy tall ladder going up the side. There's some lichen. I just basically, moss was lichen that's from Woodland Scenics. You take it and you rip it up into really little fine ones. And you take a Q-tip, or better yet, a toothpick. You dip it in your Type-On glue. You put a dot on the water tank, and then you press your lichen onto it and just let it sit. The water spout really was that black on the Ridgeway tank, so I left it as is. Apparently they had a lot of soot. And I'll talk about the lift mechanisms. You can see them on the Durango tank, and I'll show you the real tank as built. I haven't gotten rid of these yet. That's also radio control bell cranks. They're on a 1/8 inch drill steel rod. It's in brass bearings. On that one, all that bearing surface on the interior is really overkill. You didn't need to do that much. And I had several methods of doing the lift mechanisms on the spouts that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay. One is, and this is the most effective one out of the 3 that I've tried. I call this the slide trombone. You take a couple of pieces of nylon tubing and you glue them alongside the framing on the base of the tank, right up underneath the tank barrel, so that it doesn't show. And this is the one that shows the least. Right behind the spout, there's the bend in the trombone that sticks out, and it literally pushes the spout up into the up position or down. In order for this to function, the spout has to weigh a little bit. So if you're using a plastic casting, you're going to have to fill it with lead. Or if you use a pot metal casting, it'll work well by itself. You just got to be more careful when you drill the holes for the pivot point. The mechanism goes down through the frost box underneath. I'll show you that in a few minutes as well. And you want the axis or the pivot point to be really high up inside that frost box, almost at the top. And that way, when you pull the bottom lever, the top of the same lever is only moving a fraction of an inch. So it gives you a better span of control. I've got another one where it's just a push-pull wire out of the back. And the push-pull wire out of the back doesn't quite give you as good a control. Here's the tanks more or less finished. The one for Telluride is kind of in the middle up there with the bare ladder. It doesn't have the chain on it yet. The Durango one's in front. And for Durango, I used a piece of black string to pull the spout up. Again, the spout has to weigh something to lower itself back down again. What happens with any of these mechanisms that I used for lifting the spout, the chain goes slack. I haven't worked out a way of really getting HO scale chain over a pulley yet with counterweights yet. I thought about it and I thought, man, that's an awful lot of work. And they seem to work nicely as is, so that's the way it'll be. You're likely to see the Ridgeway tank on the far left. Again, I'm going to put that in the model contest in Denver. The Durango tank you're going to see on the Durango module when we go to Denver. The Telluride tank is, I think, destined for France. I need to hear back from Sebastian on that. I haven't even told him I've got that yet. But that's going to be the Ridgeway tank for him. And the Ames tank is already in the hands of Laurie down in Texas. So those are the tanks, everybody. And okay, so just shameless plugs. AIM products, basically it's chalk, and I use white and off-white for the stains. I use light color rust for doing just general weathering. And then I used a little bit darker, kind of their medium rust for doing the rust streaks. And a little goes a long way. You put a tiny bit on there with cheap paintbrush with some of the bristles cut out of it. And then you go right back with a Q-tip and wipe it down. And you're going to be wiping off more than you put on. But it ends up working out rather well. Some of the challenges with building these water tanks in HO scale. I have to be very careful handling this. Okay, if you guys can see that, that's an HO scale ladder made of 2x4s in HO scale. And this one is destined for the extra ladder that was on the Ridgeway tank. And Kapler used to supply those. And now Durango Press has plastic ladders. From what I understand, Mount Albert Lumber is making a jig for those. They're going to be coming out with that soon. And here is the Ridgeway tank, if I could hold it still enough for you guys to see the detail on there. The calcium kind of builds up on the top of the, I got to unblur. Bear with me for 10 seconds here. Okay, we're not blurred in the background anymore, so I can just hold this right up. There you go. Ridgeway had a big plank missing out of it, and the frost box was offset. They had a lot of staining, calcium staining along the lower parts of the tank. There's that spout. Now this spout mechanism was just a direct push-pull from the back. So there's a wire you can barely see on the back of it, and that pushes and pulls the spout. On Durango, they're string operated. Let me get that one for you. Here's the Durango tank. And the roof, when they use black tar paper on a roof, it turns gray after a short time out in the weather. So that's the roof to it. There's the decals, a lot of rust streaking, and 2 spouts. A little bit of history. The spout on the west side was just for show. It didn't actually connect to the interior of the tank. So that was just a Hollywood prop. The original spout on the east side of the tank was still functional. Now what I did on here, I marked north, south, east, west, and where the ladder location was on there. So I knew where the ladder was going to be when I installed this on the module. Okay, the Telluride tank, I got to be more careful. It's got a part sticking out from under it. Now on this one, the mechanism has got a much better span of control. And I'm moving that about a full 3/4 of an inch of swing at the bottom, and it's barely moving a 1/16 of an inch at the top. And that makes the spout go up and down. So that's how I did the mechanism on those. This one's got shingles that are from, they're basically all wound around. Those are the peel and stick shingles. Some of the other tanks I made had plastic roofs on them. And in another shameless plug, I went up from Arizona. I live in Arizona, about a mile away from Chuck and Scott and Don. And I heard from Terry on one of the previous Zoom calls we had that Classic Miniatures might be for sale. So I went up and visited Cliff Mazzell, and I saw this cool project. Looked like nobody had been working on it in years. It had these water tank roofs that were cast in a really lightweight material. And I said, you know, now we're either going to buy Classic Miniatures, be putting too many eggs in one basket, but would you sell off just the water tank project? And he said, yeah. And I said, I don't know how to, you know, fairly give you a price on that. And he said, how about $200? And I went, $200? Really? And then he started pulling boxes out. I mean, big boxes. So I have 300 tank roofs, round and hexagon or octagon. So if anybody's interested in building a water tank project and they just need the roof, give me a shout.
Okay, Steve, well, thanks a lot. I'm just checking the chat right now. And yeah, what we've got in here from Scott McLeod says, great looking water tank, Steve, just like they've been sitting out there in the weather. Jim Spice says, good job. So we do have a question, Steve, and that is, what does the inside of a square water tank look like?
The inside of the square water tank in Eureka had a tank in it. I don't know what, I haven't been up to Eureka, and it's a 4x4 trip that I really want to make. Lori described it to me. She said there is a tank inside, but she couldn't get in. The building had a padlock on the door and they didn't want to look up through the windows. She said it had legs for a tank in it. It's most likely a square tank. And the reason it's surrounded by a building is because it's almost at timberline up there in Colorado. And I guess they were having freeze problems way back in the day. So when the Silverton Northern was operating, there really was a tank inside the building. And if you go up, anybody who models the White Pass will tell you about Bennett or Carcross. Those tanks are also inside a building to deal with frost.
Mhm.
And
Let's
it's
see.
anybody's guess what the spout looked like. So I just gave it my best shot.
So there are a couple of questions have gone by here on the on your animation, Steve. One of them is, can you provide a little bit more detail on the operation of the spout? And then another related question is, are the spout actuator mechanism, is that all your own design?
I made it up as I was going along. The design that I copied was on the Durango tank with the string actually pulling it up. And that was in the Gazette article, gentleman in SN3, and I can't remember who it was. You guys help me out if you can.
Was that Jim Brown?
Who was it?
Jim Brown?
It may have been. It was a really good article, so I copied the article on the first one, but all those brass bearings and drill rod and all that stuff on the inside, for the scale I modeled, it was overkill. The real hang up point on that tank is where the string goes over the edge of the tank. All I did was put some epoxy on there and smooth it down. That's the bearing surface for the string. And it jumps off of that sometimes. So I need to notch it. As far as the slide trombone mechanism, I made that up and it seems to work. So once again, if you need that slide up, I could put it up again, or this is recorded, so you can always look at the recording. But it's not hard to make one at all. And the one for the Telluride tank that I made, doing it so that a switchmaster or a tortoise underneath or just a push-pull wire can move that gives you much better control. So that's the way I did that. And all it does, the blunt end of the bottom of the spout is flat, and some of them you can sand it out a little bit concave. All it is a little brass loop of 20 thousandths wire pushing against it. And as it pushes against it, it hinges up and up it goes. And the weight of it, when you pull it away, the weight of it pulls it down. It's really all there is to it.
Yeah, so there's another question, actually a compliment and a question. It says, these water tanks are amazing. Will you install them in a layout, or have they become a hobby unto itself?
Seeing as how I own 300, did I mention water tankers? It is turning into a hobby of its own, and I hope to turn that into a business. Years ago, I made the Rico engine house, the brick one. I looked around, made sure I wasn't competing with anybody, and I think I sold 11 of them. I broke the mold. I'm working on making that mold work again, and then I may run off a few more of the Rico engine houses. But what I do when I need something on my layout, if I've got to build more than one of them, or if I've got to make molds to make it, I just say, okay, well, why don't I make a kit, and my friends can buy them or whatever. And it just seemed like the logical next step. So the logical next step, and $200 got me into these boxes of roofs that are taking up space in the garage, and I need to turn them into water tanks. At this point, I don't have any molds for roofs in S scale, unfortunately, or O scale. So, or if anybody models NN3, you got to get inventive. That's about it. They are going on, one's going on a module, another one's going in a contest. I don't know what I'm going to do with the Ridgeway tank, because I'm no longer going to put Ridgeway on my home layout. The home layout is now going to be the Yukon and Yakitiak, Alaska Railroad. So I just call it the Yakitiak. And they're going to have enclosed tanks. So I'm going to build some more enclosed tanks.